Hey, this is Leif Ganford. I played the cash register thief in The Amazing Spider-Man, and you're listening to the Everything Geek podcast.
Hey, this is Rich McDonald, and I play Commander David Mason on Call of Duty Black Ops 2. And you're listening to Everything Geek podcast.
Hello, I'm Simon Fisherbecker. You probably know me better as Dorian Moldavar from Doctor Who, or the Fat Friar from Harry Potter. And this is Everything Geek Podcast.
Your attention, masters, mistresses. All systems functional for the Everything Geek Podcast.
Hey, it's James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Master Plo in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Everything Geek, the podcast.
Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot with the Everything Geek podcast.
Hello everyone, you're listening to the Everything Geek podcast. I'm your host Ruari, and joining me is a very special guest today. We have actor Jack Klaff, who's best known for playing John D. Branon, Red 4 in Star Wars Episode 4 in New Hope and Apostis, and James Bond for Your Eyes Only. So how are you, Jack?
I'm just damn fine. Sorry, what listeners need to know is that I got into this vehicle, which is like a sort of sound vehicle for us for today, and my knee hit the radio, and that's genuinely what came onto the radio, and I'm just doing an impression of it, where someone genuinely was saying, that's what I talk to people, I interview people, and that's how it is. And you guys thought I was going crazy, and I thought you were going crazy. Nice moment. Please go on, Rory, and hello to everyone.
Yeah, I guarantee people I don't normally sound like that. Well, actually, I don't sound like that at all, and I don't actually brag about getting people on the podcast. That's one good thing about me. One good thing. I'm not a bragger.
Well, certainly, whatever you think, Rory, I suspect that was an arresting and attention-grabbing beginning. But please, you go on, and I'm ready to talk.
Yeah, that's great. So am I. So, yeah, Jack, getting right into the questions, my first for you is, how did you decide you wanted to become an actor?
Well, there's kind of two sides to the story. The first is that I had always taken part in plays at school and so on, and I was rather active early on in performing. I was lucky enough to do certain roles in a sort of semi-professional way in South Africa. But the other side of it was that I thought I'd become a lawyer. I thought I'd have a proper job. And things being what they were in South Africa at that time, the apartheid laws were in place, and it was quite clear that finding justice wasn't going to be as easy as one might think. Certainly, as I got older through my teen years, there was an incredible amount of repression and injustice. And so I found myself seeking to find justice through storytelling. So it was two things, really. One, I felt I liked it, and some people said I was okay at it. And secondly, I wanted to tell stories as a means to finding justice, even though initially my intention was to be a lawyer, someone who interceded between the state and the individual.
It's a very interesting story. We've never had any stories like that before on the podcast. That's very cool. Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear me? So, my second question, Jack, how did you first get involved with Star Wars?
What happened really very simply was that I had trained at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School, which is a very, very good theatre school, as you know, in England, Britain, and obviously in Bristol. It's an historic theatre school because it's based on the Old Vic in London. And as a matter of fact, the theatre, which was built in 1766, was built according to the plans which was stolen by Christopher Wren, who designed St. Paul's and so on. I'm so sorry, I'm lying. Christopher Wren, I'm maligning Christopher Wren there. Christopher Wren drew up the plans, but the plans were stolen by the playwright Sheridan, who wrote The Rivals and School for Scandal and other things, Richard Brinsley Sheridan, who was a theatre manager as well as a playwright. He stole the plans and sent them to Bristol. So Bristol is an historic town, and it has an historic theatre where Daniel Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe up the road, and some of the pubs there are mentioned in Treasure Island and so on. And I trained at the school, which was also a very practical place. I was part of the company. And then at the end of my time as a student, and after a season at Bristol, I happened to go to London. I was waiting to hear about jobs all over the place, and I got two sort of science fiction type jobs. One was in a series called Space 1999, and one was in Star Wars. I met the casting lady. I didn't have to audition or anything like that. I was just told to go to Pinewood. This was in 1976, at the height of the drought in that year, and I simply went along and did this part in this film. No one had really heard about Star Wars at that time, so I didn't audition or anything like that. I just went along, played the part. I was on it for 2 days and really thought not much more about it.
And of course, you weren't sure how successful it'd be. Like, you didn't think that you'd be here talking about it still, 37 years on from it, I think it is.
Yeah, it is. It's 38 years. It's 38 years. It was summer of 1976 that I did the job. So it is 38 years. July, it was in June or July 1976 that we filmed. And as I say, that was an incredibly hot summer for those days. And my agent called the movie Stan Wars. No one thought much of it. As a matter of fact, even the actors who were involved were slightly cynical about the dialogue and cynical about the whole process. It seemed like it was a sort of interesting experimental film in a way, and I've heard some of the actors since then, mock the dialogue and so on. But it can't have been that bad because, of course, Alec Guinness, had shares in the thing. He had a share of the profit. So there was no expectation that it would be that great. And as a matter of fact, there were other scenes, I believe, that I was supposed to be part of, and my agent was rather grand about them and said, "Oh no, he's going to go off and be a classical actor. He's got parts in Shakespeare, and so he won't be available. You'll have to find somebody else." So I believe there were lines of dialogue which were apportioned to John Dee, which were played by another actor or something like that. I know that my agent they still are rather sniffy about the whole thing.
Yeah, I know, because I was talking to Chris Monk on the podcast recently, and his agent or someone, actually almost took his name out of the credits, because just before the movie came out, like, lots of people were thinking it was going to be really bad, and his agent was considering taking his name out of the credits. So, yeah, that was interesting that you were going to have more lines of dialogue. Those would have been interesting to see, that's for sure.
Well, I don't know if that's true. It might have been that they reworked it. I don't know, but But the bits that I did were all to do with the death. So any scenes that took place would have obviously, in terms of the way the film was made, would have preceded that in terms of the chronology of the film, even though they may have been recorded later. Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, okay. So my third question is, what was it like working with the cast and crew of Star Wars?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't meet anyone. I very briefly met Mark Hamill, who seemed to me, a lively young actor, like so many lively young actors, very bright. I met Garrick Hagan at that time. I met Bill Hootkins, and Robert O'Mahony I actually knew because we had been actors together at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre at that time, and it may well have been that someone saw us both there. Apart from that, I really didn't work with too many people. I remember the first assistant was, pretty, as first assistants always are. He was pretty loud and efficient. George Lucas was very, very quiet, very, very gentle. He introduced himself. He was this, not very tall, not short, not a medium height guy with a beard, very gentle. Introduced himself. Asked me was I okay with being blown up? What he meant was,
Yeah, I know.
And would I be okay with a wet cloth? He sat me down. I was on the board that people must have told you about many, many times. The screen was behind me onto which other things were going to be projected. He had me say my line. He said, look there, look there. The explosive went off. They handed me a cloth. I put it over my face. He shook my hand and very quietly said, thank you very much, good job, and I was done. I waited for 2 days, and I probably was on that board for 2 hours maximum. And the actual footage that they shot was probably, a few minutes.
Very interesting and very nice story, with all the actors and George, and of course, sadly, Bill, who played Porkins, no longer with us, and he passed away several years ago.
Well, as a matter of fact, Bill and I were in touch with each other. His wife is casting director, and I've seen her over the years, and I've also seen him, and I helped him with on one or two occasions to. He was offered certain parts where he had to play in certain accents, and I was able to help him with those when they were accents that he didn't particularly know. And he was very nice about that, very generous. And actually, in Bill's case, he was, a fine jobbing actor, did some good things, but he ended up playing Hitchcock in this remarkable play at the Royal Court, in which Terry Johnson had him play this tremendous part of Alfred Hitchcock, and I heard he was very, very good in it. So he had a good crack of the whip towards the end of his life, which is nice. And it was a very, very nice guy. Garrick Hagan, I saw less than 2 weeks ago. As you know, we were at an event, and Bob O'Mahony, who actually I knew rather well. I haven't seen. I believe he now lives in Ireland.
Yeah, he lives here. I know because his agency is one of the ones in my area. Well, not that I've ever been. I just know he's represented by an agency in Dublin where I live. So yeah.
Dublin. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I tried to get him on the podcast, but he said no. Not as eager to talk Star Wars as you are, Jack.
What does he do now?
I don't know. Probably plays mostly, I guess. Like I haven't looked at his agency's website in a while, but he didn't really seem to have that many, films recently. I think it was mostly plays, theater work, that sort of thing. But I'm not really too sure.
When I started, I was in the theatre school, and then they took a few of us down to the company, and we played parts that were okay. I mean, strictly speaking, we were supposed to be, just lugging furniture around, and we played some quite good parts. I was lucky. I played some fantastic parts, actually, but not leading parts, good parts. But Bob, Robert Marnie, in those days was, he was really regarded as one of the leading lights of the company. I don't know if he's older than I am, but he'd certainly come out of drama school for longer. Now, listen, when I stop, you'll see there'll be a bit of a pause, and then, just crack on. So I'm going to stop, and next question.
Yeah, well, and you actually mentioned Garrick Hagan and the convention that recently, Collectomania Glasgow, which was great. Now, I don't often do this, but I'm going to give a spoiler for our listeners to treat them a little bit. Garrick will actually be on the podcast next month, so yeah, I thought you might like to know that too.
Yeah, no, give him my love. I mean, I've known Garrick for a long, long time, and actually, I've seen him here and there. I've seen him in the theater and all over the place, but not that often. Just, time to time I see him, and what a lovely man he is. Please go on.
Yeah, so my next question is, what are your favorite memories of playing Apostis in For Your Eyes Only, the James Bond movie?
Well, funnily enough, the first thing I need to tell you is that I'm sitting here in a van, and it is a van that has been out into the country for the last 2 days. I sit and write in this and other vehicles, which I've had over many, many years. And so one of the things that I learned from playing Apostis was, when you're sitting around for hours and hours and hours and they give you a caravan, you can do an awful lot of writing. So I started writing in one of those vans, and, I feel that I write well when I'm in such a place. And I saw the sun rise and the sun set for 2 days running right in the middle of nature with cows nearby and horses and dogs and so on. So that's one of the memories. The other memories are of, being on something where I had actually a small, really small part, but they stretched it out. So I had weeks and weeks, both to write and also to live. Mainly we filmed, we were on Corfu and on the mainland in Greece in a place called Meteora, which is actually, it used to be surrounded by the oceans, but it's now on dry land, very, very high. I suppose there were cliffs before, but very high stone promontories where the monks, the Greek Orthodox monks lived. There were two who were living apart from their own company. They had nobody else around, and they were very unhappy with us filming there. So we filmed on Corfu, where I broke a tooth. I was so keen to get my coffee that I bashed the steel steps, broke a tooth, and to cut my nose. When we were at Meteora, this was a place where the monks didn't want us to film, and so they covered the roofs of the monastery with yellow and garishly colored plastic bags, so that the Bond film, evil as it was as far as they were concerned, couldn't be filmed at the angles that they wanted, because the monks had prevented us from doing so. And so they rebuilt that bit of the set, the top of the cliffs and so on. They rebuilt them in Pinewood, and as a matter of fact, some of the scenes we shot on location, and some of the scenes we shot actually in Pinewood. And we were filming in 1980, and my son was born during the filming of that, and also John Lennon was shot during that period. So it's one of the memories I have, is of my son being born, and he was born in Liverpool. My son was born in Liverpool, in the hospital in which John Lennon had been born. And on the 8th of December, 1980, Lennon was shot. I can remember going to Pinewood and hearing the news on my portable transistor radio as I was going to Pinewood. I was on the film for 11 weeks. I had been filming Greece before. I was playing the character of a eunuch in another thing, a TV thing for Time Life about Alexander the Great. And I was in my hotel, and they said, "Look, would you mind staying in Greece? You've got a job, 11-week job," and it paid quite well, actually, playing a small part in Star Wars. So my memories are of, writing in the caravan, and filming on this thing for weeks and weeks. I got to know Roger. I didn't get to know Roger Moore very well, but a little bit. He was very, very kind to me. He didn't like people panicking, so when there was a lot of noise around my driving a Rolls Royce, he just asked people to just be quiet and let me concentrate. When I had to kick him off the mountain, there was a shot of me coming right to the edge, and it was very, very high. And he said to me, "Oh, my legs go to cotton wool when I'm up that high." He said I wouldn't do it. And they just made it very, very gentle and good for me. The other thing is that there were extraordinary stuntmen around, including the guy who did the big stunt on that, which was when I kick Roger Moore, he falls backwards and he falls down to the length of a rope and then just hangs there, and he climbs up the rope again. Well, of course, that could kill you if you don't do it right. And this tremendous stuntman, worked it out with sandbags and brakes and all that kind of thing, so that he was safe as he did this incredible stunt, where I kick Roger and then the stuntman goes, to that level, a lot of feet at the end of a rope. He's the same stuntman who did the skiing in another movie, where he skis off the edge and then opens up his parachute and it's the Union Jack. It's that same stuntman. And I think each stunt bought him a house. He was paid so much. But that was a tremendous memory, watching him prepare and hearing him talk about it and, actually doing that stunt. And I remember reading a review saying it's one of the greatest stunts in movie history. So, well done him. That was a memory. And of course, memories of Roger Moore, and also Carole Bouquet, who was around and about. She was the main woman, very, very beautiful woman, quite a lot younger than Roger, actually. Her bloke, who was, I think, Lebanese, was a very great friend of Polanski's. So that was quite a gossipy thing, to know that Polanski was now living in France, escaping extradition and so on, and living with this guy. As I say, it was 11 weeks. We were in Corfu. I hired a moped. I had an absolute ball and, traveled around an awful lot. I was in Greece for quite a considerable time then. And, I met a lot of the stuntmen. There was one guy called Martin Grace, actually, who was a tremendous stuntman. Later on, he got very badly injured because he hung on to a train, and the director asked him to hang on, and eventually he hit into a pillar that was by the side of the train. But he was a very gentle, very soulful person. As a matter of fact, shortly after I finished filming, I met him in Hampstead. He was just walking around, and I was going to a concert which was being given by a really brilliant young pianist, a really lovely woman. And I thought there may be a romance. I thought it was a tremendous book, a wonderful story of this dishy, blue-eyed, fit stuntman and this rather gorgeous, highfalutin concert pianist. So there, lots and lots of memories of that time. And as I say, I'll never forget going to film and, first of all, going to film in this big moment when my son was born, and I went up to see him during the filming. And then John Lennon shot. And of course, John Lennon was born in the same hospital. How's that?
You have a great memory. That's quite a lot of, to remember. But wow, I mean, the writing, your son, all the filming, all those weeks you did. I mean, all of it, like, wow, that's quite a lot.
I wrote a couple of things. I wrote a play at that time, which is still being done, actually. And I wrote a sort of strange rhyming thing, which I gave to a friend of mine. And I don't know if you know the singing group Fascinating Aida, but I was sort of in on the beginning of their singing. My girlfriend at the time was a part of that group. And so, this kind of idea of writing doggerel and so on, I feel that maybe I maybe in a tiny way I inspired them to write silly verses and go on and become fascinating Aida. I mean, what I wrote while I was on that thing was a silly verse about the Royal Shakespeare Company, which, you know, some people are still doing, and the leading singer of Fascinating Aida took up and did beautifully. So yes, no, it was a very important time, and it was one of those periods when, you know, I went from this job to that job. I was very, very lucky. And also, in addition to all of that, it's when I got my driver's license as well. So it helped me to
That was
drive
a busy time.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Please go on.
So my fifth question, Jack, is which of your acting roles in your career are you most proud of?
Well, that's a very difficult question. I mean, there's no doubt that there's one role which is strange, which I've played twice and which people have liked me in, and that is the character of Atahualpa. Atahualpa was the sun god. He was a sort of king of the Incas, and I've played that twice. It's a rather important, I think, in a way, play written, one of the more important ones written in the post-war period. It's by a writer called Peter Schaffer, who also wrote Amadeus and a number of other works. And the Inca sun god is just one of those things where you prance around in a loincloth. You have to be very fit, and it's a sort of very showy part. That's one role I liked. I also played not so long ago a character of Michael Mansfield QC. I like playing human rights lawyers because I wanted to be a human rights lawyer, as you know. So that was rather well received. There's another play called I'm Not Rappaport, which I enjoyed doing. And I think some of the Shakespeares I've done have been good. I've played Macbeth 5 times. I've played Iago once, Toby Belch. Claudius in Hamlet is a much better role than you might think. So, you know, those are good roles. And also I've been lucky enough to sometimes write things that, you know, have been good for me to play. So there have been those parts as well. On television, I played a character called King of the Road in one of the Ruth Rendell mysteries. And on radio, I played Oscar Wilde, which was I was actually nominated for that. Because when you really study how Oscar, I'm going to do an impression of how I think Oscar Wilde probably spoke, since you're in Dublin. He probably spoke rather like that. And when he gave speeches, we know that it was rather a musical. And those kind of roles I think I've enjoyed. I played Byron on radio. I played Quasimodo on radio. So it hasn't been all bad. Please go on.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I think the voice you did was pretty good, yeah. Yeah, so very interesting. My final question, Jack, is do you have any upcoming acting roles or other projects you'd like to talk about?
Well, recently I did a thing on radio again where I did Clement Freud and a number of other people. I did a show which I wrote and performed, which is about Newton. So I'm doing the follow-up to that at a festival for Gravity Fields. Coming up towards the end of the year and early next year, I've been asked to do a George Bernard Shaw play, which is not that well known, but is very funny. And we've had a tryout of it, and people seem to enjoy it. One of the projects I'm involved with, well, there's 2 really. One is a sitcom which has got up to a certain level and may get made. I don't know if I'll actually act in it, but that's a rather interesting idea of a comedy set in a scientific lab. I've worked among scientists quite a lot. And my main project right now is I'm moving on to a houseboat, a Dutch barge, which comes from Leiden, and I'm doing a human rights project, which is initially as a written thing, and then I may do it as a performance, which is commemorating the 800th anniversary of the signing of Magna Carta. Magna Carta was signed in 1215, 800 years ago, next June. So in June 2015, I may well have a party, but I'll certainly be writing about, you know, how a certain kind of democracy came into being in our world. And that's one of the projects I'm involved with right now.
It's very interesting, yeah. And I think it's great that not only are you an actor, but as you said, like when you were working on Bond, you've done a lot of writing as well. I think that's really impressive as well. It's almost like a second career, if you will. The way you've done so much of it.
Yes, I've been very lucky, and there is that, and what I've been rehearsing, just so you know, is I've just come from a rehearsal where I'm directing an actress called Sian Weber in a piece of work. It's a really interesting and I think very lucky thing. In the 1980s, not sort of 8-9 years after I did the Bond film, I was performing at a festival in Yorkshire, and I met a woman called Martha Gellhorn. Now, Martha Gellhorn was a journalist, a reporter, a novelist. She was one of the great war correspondents. She's often called one of the only and first, if not the first, female war correspondent, but she was just a very, very good correspondent, male or female. And I got to know her very briefly, and I now have the rights to everything she wrote. And so what I'm rehearsing is something I've written, which is a show about this woman who wrote about war very brilliantly. The newsy bit about her, which she never liked people mentioning, was that she lived with Ernest Hemingway for 9 years, was married to him for about 4 or 5 of them. But she really had a great deal to say about America, about what was happening in America, and about war. Why is she relevant? Well, that place where there have been riots in America now, which everyone's talking about, is actually part of St. Louis, which is her hometown. So that's number one news story. But if you want to go global, then the other news stories are, Israel versus Gaza, and certainly ISIS or IS or ISIL, and the whole story of Iraq and Syria and so on. Well, a number of war correspondents are being killed right now. 2 of them have been beheaded. And it's a great tradition of the storyteller, which is after all what I've said I am, going into these war zones and bringing back the story, telling people about what's going on. Well, somebody who hero worshipped, Martha Gellhorn, was killed recently in Syria, a woman. These 2 guys have been killed. The great tradition of the war correspondent mustn't end. And that's one of the reasons why I want to tell her story. Also because she's so perceptive about how war affects the small people, the little people, the children, the women, the soldiers who don't want to be there, and so on. So that's the rehearsal I've just coming to. So it's a pretty full schedule from now on. And we've had some money to get it ready, and now the next stage is to perform it. So that's what I've just finished doing just before I came to talk to you.
It sounds very interesting. It sounds like it'll be great. I mean, getting to tell a story like that to people who might not have heard it before, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. So we're back to wars and Star Wars and spies and all those kind of things. She lived through it all. So bless your heart, young man, or both young men, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we're now taking questions from our live chat for Jack. If anyone wants to call in, they can do that as well. We do have one question from our follower Tony. He asked, "What was your favorite role to act out?"
What was my favorite role to act? Did you say?
Act out, yeah, or character.
We just did that. So I've said those characters, Atahualpa, and the character in I'm Not Rappaport, and the human rights lawyers and the Shakespearean roles. All of those are terrific. Oh, there's another role I haven't mentioned, which is I did play a character called Niels Bohr. Now, Bohr, Bohr, was a great Danish physicist, a near contemporary of Einstein's, and a very brilliant man in whose house the whole of quantum mechanics was hacked out. That was another good role, but I think I've answered that one. Please go on.
Yeah. But that's actually all of our questions to you, Jack. Yeah, that's the only one that I've shot. So yeah, that's all of our questions. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you on the podcast, Jack.
Yes, and I'll tell you another role I recently played, just so you know, is in where I grew up, South Africa, and maybe we'll finish with this. There were some prisoners who were opposed to apartheid who were on Robben Island for years and years and years. And I should probably mention that my father, who had a watchmaking business, fixed Nelson Mandela's watch. And he fixed Mandela's watch before Mandela went onto Robben Island, where Mandela was for 27 years. And I always think of Mandela counting off the hours and the days and the years on the watch that my dad fixed. And so one of the roles, when you ask about roles, was I recently did a reading in South Africa House and around the country of a Bible. It was sent in and an Indian guy pretended to the authorities that it was a Hindu Bible. In fact, it was the works of Shakespeare, and all the great leaders signed it. They signed this Bible, which was really the works of Shakespeare, and said what their favorite bits were. And it's just very poignant that Mandela signed, I don't understand how men should fear, seeing that a death, a necessary end, will come when it will come. So, less than a year since Mandela died, think about that. That's quite a thing for him to say. He was prepared to die for the freedom that people enjoy, and I suppose that's where I'm at. And one other thing, and that is that Star Wars really is based on the ideas of a guy called Joseph Campbell. And, I do a lot of teaching. I do a lot of work with the idea of storytelling and, myths and legends and the hero that goes off and fights and then comes back and brings back good things for humankind. That's the great, I suppose, theme and the great structure of Star Wars. And that's what I've been studying as well. So that's another connection.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So that's all of our questions to you, Jack. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast.
Likewise, and best of wishes to everyone. Speak soon and look after yourself, huh?
Yeah, hopefully we can talk to you soon then, again.
All right, with pleasure. And so best wishes to you both, wherever you are, Dakota and Dublin. You only obviously go to places beginning with D. Take care. Thanks a lot.
We'll talk to you soon then. Bye.
Yes, bye-bye.
So that was a great interview we just had with Jack Klaff. He was a great guest. Make sure to check out our YouTube channels. The podcast is www.youtube.com/user/everythinggeekcast. Mine is www.youtube.com/user/stepdestroyers. Baron's is www.youtube.com/user/starlegend9595. Check us out on Twitter, twitter.com/everythinggeekp. Check out Jack Klaff's website, www.jackklaff.com/index. And check out Channel 113 where we broadcast live on www.channel113.com. So geeks out, everyone.